Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Inside Track, the editor and the assistant editor relationship. On this episode, we have the editing team from the recent film Chevalier. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, you did.
Not bad. All right.
Not Chevalier, but Chevalier.
Yeah. So we have John Axelrad and Jared Simon. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Go right ahead. Tell the audience about yourselves, how you got your start, where you learned editing, and,
You want to start?
Sure, yeah. My name is Jared Simon. I'm an assistant editor, an additional editor, and I've been doing this for, more than 8 years now, which is kind of wild to think about. And it's been a wild ride. I started out in television and I moved into features, worked with Rob Sullivan, Matt Rundell, and then I got introduced to John while he was working on Astra, and the way he ran the cutting room was very attractive to me, and I was like, this is an environment that I really want to stay in and stay close to him. So then we worked together on Antebellum and Chevalier, and it's been a great working relationship.
Awesome. John?
So I'm John Axelrad. I've been around way too long, so I'm not going to date myself by giving you the years, but I actually, I'm about to date myself now. I learned Avid in 1991, and I think that was 3 or 4 years after your existence. And I went to USC Film School, and USC housed the first training facility for Avid, where they gave up office space. Avid was able to go there and train paying customers, but if there were spots open, they would give them to the students. And I remember I had just graduated, and I learned video editing, and by that point I kind of knew editing was my future. When I went to school, like every film student, I thought I wanted to be a writer-director. But I soon fell in love with editing, and after I graduated, I heard that Avid took up space, and I just asked one of the administrators if I could slip in if no students were interested, and no students signed up for it. They didn't know what it was. In school, I had the opportunity to learn Editoroid, but that just went by the wayside. So I jumped at the opportunity, learned Avid, became one of the few in Hollywood who had both film experience and Avid experience at the time. And as Avid first took television, movies of the week and whatnot, I got work as an assistant editor, and then when Avid went to feature films, I became a feature film assistant and worked with a lot of notable editors. The last I worked with was Ann V. Coates. We did 3 films together, and I just looked for every opportunity to edit when I could, and cut a few low-budget films, and word of mouth, and things snowballed, and then I met Jared on that Astra, so kind of culminated there.
So where did you go to school?
I went to the School of Visual Arts in New York, and I studied editing specifically. I went there knowing I wanted to do film editing because I always loved watching movies, and I liked playing with computers, and so the natural intersection was editing, because it was just, to me it was like playing around. It still is like playing around on a computer, and every software update is like a new toy that I get to play with, and I like trying to bend and break things and find their limits, and so that's always been one of the driving forces for me. And again, no one wanted to edit. Everyone wanted to write or direct. And so I was editing everyone's projects, and it was a great experience for me to be able to just like try and stretch myself. The entire thing was very independent, and I thrived on that. So I used the momentum after college to that was New York. I moved to Los Angeles, where there was much more production at the time. I don't know if it's still the case. I think there's more in New York. More in New York now than there was then.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. But, I was able to capitalize on the momentum that I had as a student, where I could kind of, excuse away some of the gaps in my knowledge because I was still, fresh out of school. So, very eager to learn. That's how I made a good impression, because when you're first graduating, it's like some people don't even realize that they're not going to be an editor or a writer or a director or a cinematographer, which is what they studied. You don't realize that there's a career path here, and what does that look like? Because when you graduate, you're worth more in person than you are on paper. And it's like, how do you make a good impression and make sure people will, give you that chance to break in and prove yourself?
So, what's really great is, Anvi Coates, you were her assistant?
Yeah, well, I was the Avid assistant. Rob Sullivan was her first assistant on many, many shows, and Ann went from film to Lightworks. She did Lightworks for, I think, just one show, and then they decided Avid is better, and they trained on Avid, and my job was to help transition Ann to a keyboard, and a little known fact that Rob will always refute, but I'm left-handed, and I taught them left-handed. And so Ann and Rob both work left-handed.
But they're right-handed.
They're right-handed.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, I was the Avid assistant, and I did help because we were still doing film in those days. It was very robust. Avid was, the first NLE to master the change list. So we would, keep track of key code and code that we would put on the edges of the tracks, and it would give us a cut list based on Ann's edits, and we would be in there splicing the film to match. And I mean, that was, to me, the glory days, where Avid outshined every other NLE because they were the only ones that really translated well to film. And competitors came and went, but Avid always prevailed. But
Isn't that when Avid had the film composer? And
yes,
so it was
the
like
film composer
systems.
and the media composer. Yeah, Avid still keeps feet in frame, and I do rely on that. Coming from the film days, and in sound especially, we still use feet in frames. But yeah, it was a fun ride. When I was an assistant, I was considered a hot commodity at the time because there's so few of us who knew, and I always teased Jared that I was the king of analog. So, I could run a DA88 machine better than nobody.
And he kept all of his old Avid master tape stickers, and so I earned one. He stuck one on my door.
That's your badge.
He calls me the Avid master.
So, there's a time, things have changed so much where, that's when you were transferring film to a medium to get it to digitize into Film Composer at the time.
Yeah.
Now everything's digital, which goes directly into the system, so.
Yeah, well, as soon as Avid was able to do HD, I started with Avid when we were still using RMags, and I think I still have one. It's like a 2 gigabyte RMag that weighs 10 pounds and as big as a
2
shoebox.
gig was like a brick.
Yeah, as a brick.
So.
But yeah, once the resolution, we got high definition, we were able to screen right out of the Avid instead of having to conform the film. And since that happened, the crews shrunk. So they were bigger than ever with both Avid and film in the editing room. Usually had a crew of 5 to 6, when working with Ann. And then, it just shrunk down, and assistants who were strictly film assistants, they either adapted or they just left the business.
So just out of curiosity, you met on at Astra. How did you find Jared, or Jared, how did you find this job to work with John?
It was through Rob Sullivan. I had been working with them, and then the film that we were on came to an end, and so I was a free agent, and John invited me over for coffee, and it was actually secretly an interview.
Yeah. Well, I remember, because I'm good friends with Rob, and another coworker of yours, Greg Bjorkman, said that Jared will be running this town eventually. So
Good to know.
I was very impressed. I invited Jared in to sit down with me, and there was an opening on at Astra for a second assistant editor. And in retrospect, we really underutilized Jared because it was, we just kind of, you were off in a room by yourself, and the show, there's so many moving parts. You didn't really get to shine until I then got offered Antebellum, and the first assistant I was working with, Scott Morris, was still attached to Ad Astra, and I asked Jared if he would work with me, and he just blew me away. Yes, he blew me away. I mean, you didn't have a whole lot of experience, but it was your enthusiasm, your intuition, your anticipation, and your studious nature, just being able to know, being able to figure out what you didn't know ahead of time. And then great questions. You asked me wonderful questions, and it just seemed like you were a pro at it on your very first job. So
That's amazing.
And these are things I value in an assistant, someone who is going to be forward-thinking and not just wait for things to happen, but to anticipate. And if they don't know, which is perfectly fine, I'm there. We have discussions.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and a big part of my job on Ad Astra, even though maybe I wasn't given as much of a creative opportunity as I have on other projects, but it was still fit. I made it what I wanted it to be. I taught myself FileMaker Pro on that job. I experimented with different ways of using Avid. I mean, there were a few down days where I tried every single Boris effect that there is in the box, and I now know what all of them do. I've forgotten a few of them, but I mean,
But this is what's great. You want someone who's going to be engaged like this and have a thirst. And, you alluded to it before that not a lot of people, and I see it in film school, not a lot of people see editing as a career path. And I just kind of discovered it. I realized my whole youth, that's what I loved doing. I would take cassette tapes and splice them together to edit. And, it just never occurred to me that I was an editor at heart. So, just getting people to realize that there's so much opportunity and creativity in the editing field and post-production, we really hope to get the word out.
But what's great also is, it's not just that Jared came in knowing computers. You're saying it's attitude. It's again, forward thinking. Creativity is part of it. So it's not just a technical skill. There's so much more to being an assistant.
Yeah.
There were things that I was doing that I wasn't even aware that I was doing that other people pointed out. For example, I remember our post PA at the time, Marco Gonzalez, was. He was shadowing, and he saw the directors came in, and they asked me a question. The answer was no, but I don't know. I wasn't actively thinking about it, but my response to them, I somehow spun it into a yes. Like I explained it in a way that wasn't a no. And when they left, Marco told me, he goes, "That was incredible." I was like, "What?" And he goes, "You just, you eased that whole conversation. You made them feel good about, the situation, even though it's really not anything to feel good about." And so. I wasn't even aware that was as part of an attitude thing that, I try to keep morale high, and I try to keep a positive outlook, and, try to keep it based still in reality, not to,
I always say that, like editing, assisting as well, but when you're an editor, it's 33% of the job is politician. Another 33% of the job is a psychologist. The other 33% is craftsman, and the last 1% is magician. So that's my breakdown. There's so much of what we do that require people skills and knowing how to communicate. And we are psychologists. We're also salesmen. We're and negotiators a lot of times too. So. It takes a lot of people skills and also patience And I do try to groom that in my assistants as well, because everyone I work with, I try to get moved into the editor's chair. I don't want to see someone work with me for life. And I've had a very good track record of assistants I've worked for that have become award-winning editors. My first assistant when I started doing features was Tom Cross, and we did 5 films together. And then after that, it was Kayla Empter and Lee Haugen, and Kayla's now in the Academy, and Lee is on the verge of joining ACE. And it is a thrill to me to see people, because they both started as my apprentice and worked their way up to co-edit with me. And then last, Scott Morris, who was my first on a few James Gray movies, and he was able. I told James, I said, I really think he's ready, and he was able to edit Armageddon Time for James, which was a really great break for Scott, and he did a wonderful job. So that's my hope, is to get someone who is forward-thinking, who has great leadership skills as an assistant, and then groom them into the job of editor.
And you were able to get Jared on as additional editor credit for Chevalier.
Yeah, I mean, we really have only done 2 films together, right?
3 now, yeah.
Well, 3?
Yeah.
Well, see, I don't fully include Ad Astra because you weren't the first.
Right, and then there was the Spaceman, but that's not finished yet.
Yeah, that's not finished. But yeah, I mean, every film I try to get him bumped, and I felt we were really close to co-editing together, because I can't do that immediately.
Well, actually, on Antebellum, John offered me the additional editor credit, and I asked his advice, because I wasn't out for the credit necessarily. I wanted what was best for me, and I was thinking more macro. And this is one of many things that makes John such a wonderful mentor. I asked him, "Is this what's best for me?" I really appreciated you going to bat for me, and I knew I had put in the work, but I didn't have any first assistant credits on my resume, and John said, "I think you should probably go with first assistant, just because it might make it easier for you to get other work." And of course, I really wanted to stay in sync with John, but that's the nature of this industry, is it's all freelance and project based, and so that happened to be around 2020, and so that's when the pandemic hit, and John happened to go on another project, and then I met another editor, and I started working with her, and I don't know that she would have considered me if I didn't have a first assistant editor credit on my resume.
I mean, well, you were an early mature, because you started off, the first job you worked with me as first assistant, you also did a lot of editing, and I was very impressed by it. And, I figured, let's, do the meat and potatoes first, before you get too lofty, because I did think it was important to have that on your resume. I was an assistant for 10 years, and 3 of those years were with Ann Coates, and I wouldn't trade that in. I mean, I wouldn't even shave off a year, because all of that time as an assistant and observing not just Ann, but other editors I work with, and just learning about the politics, learning about what to say, what not to say, just being able to read the room, and also see them under duress when there were disagreements between the studio, the director, producers. It was just very valuable learning experience. And so, part of me is, I don't want assistants to zoom up too quickly. And people do. I mean, there are people right out of film school, they edit a film and it wins at Sundance, and then boom, they're an editor.
There's so many valuable things that you learn from being an assistant.
Yeah.
And the things that you've taught to me about being a really good assistant, about organization and understanding how notes get communicated throughout the process, how the other departments talk to each other, how best to carry yourself. And I get asked pretty frequently, they're like, "Oh, Jared, when are you going to edit? When are you going?" And I, of course, I edit all the time. And I mean, I wasn't even thinking about that on Antebellum. I wasn't thinking about like, oh, I want to be an editor. I mean, of course, that's in the back of my mind, but I didn't know to not do that. I was in that environment, and there was footage to cut, and that was for my edification. I just wanted to play around with it. It's fun. It didn't feel like a job or like work, and so that wasn't ever anything that I was actively thinking about. And I'm not really in a rush to. I mean, of course, I want to edit, but working in this position, under really talented professionals, learning about storytelling, creativity, and how to manage a room and other people is something that I'm never going to get tired of learning.
Yeah, I mean, the 10 years I worked as an assistant editor made me into the editor I am. So I wouldn't have the skills and the diplomacy necessary and experience just to understand how to work situations, because as I said, 33% of our job is diplomacy.
And I mean, you've learned how to mentor from the editors who mentored you as well.
Yeah, definitely. But there's also things that I picked up from that experience and thought, how can I really improve mentoring somebody? Things that I wish maybe I had. Right now I'm part of the ACE internship committee, where we do take college grads who have an editing emphasis, and throughout the interview process, I think we whittle it down to 9 or 10 candidates that we actively interview all in one day. And from those candidates, we pick 2 to be the official ACE interns, and they it's a paid position at ACE, and they go through the whole internship track, where for 4 weeks it's pretty intensive. They go from show to show and have to write daily journals, and I usually mentor one of the 2 and answer daily journals on a daily basis. So it is a lot of work, and we guide them along the way. If we feel, sometimes an intern may be like, oh, today was great. I learned, they let me edit a scene. And then we're like, no. The internship is about you learning to become an assistant. So while it's great to have an opportunity to edit, you're not making the good use of your time being with a high-profile production and learning from top assistants. But it's fulfilling for me, and even the interns that don't get selected go on to become very successful as an assistant, and I do help a lot of them as well. And the whole committee makes an effort to help everybody, and everyone's invited to the lecture series, which imparts a lot of very good information.
Now, as far as, both of you collaborating on 2.5 films, were there any tips or any things that you learned from each other? Like, I mean, editing is one thing, you're crafting a story, but there might be a tool or a tip that's something maybe you didn't know of that maybe Jared taught you, or maybe you taught Jared?
Well, definitely. I mean, I learn from Jared all the time. Jared operates Avid in his sleep, and I just, there's so many things, and I always joke because when Jared is like standing next to me as I'm editing, I get very flustered because I'm thinking, oh, he's thinking I'm really slow.
He's got laser precision with the mouse. I don't know how he does it. It's impressive.
I'm a little more old school. I use the mouse a lot, and
a lot. And it's a simple mouse too.
It is a very simple mouse. But
it's got many feature films.
Yeah, he's the master of the keyboard shortcuts. But you've shown me a lot of things that we could do and things I didn't know about. I mean, you showed me a lot of efficient ways to work in Avid, and usually it's me calling him over, and he comes over and he's like, okay, fixed. But you also showed me because I'm always learning. I don't have all the answers. You also help me become a better mentor, I think, too, because I always ask, give me feedback, and made me reflect on little quirks that I have and maybe ways I can communicate better. So.
And it goes both ways. Constructive criticism, I think, is so important to continue to grow and be the best version of yourself that you can be. I mean, I constantly ask, I go, hey, if there's anything I could be doing differently or better, please let me know. And it got to the point where sometimes John would laugh at me. He's like, why are you still asking this? I'm like, because there's got to be something. But my favorite thing that John taught me on the last show was select media relatives. I thought that was so clever, and I didn't even know that was a feature. And there's so many hidden things. But after John would do a first assembly of a scene, he would right-click on the sequence, say select media relatives, and with the scene bin open, it would select all of the clips that are in that sequence. And it was a really great way to make sure that you really explored the footage, because you might say, oh my God, I didn't even look at the L setup. That wasn't even used at all. And maybe, or how many takes did I really use? And the most proud moment I had was when John watched the first assembly of a scene that I had done, and then he was like, all right, let's see. And he selected media relatives, I think maybe expecting to see, only circle takes. And I had used a fair amount of the footage.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I taught you about media relatives. So there are a few little things I learned in my initial training that I retained.
I mean, the software is so deep.
It's so deep, yeah.
It's a constant learning process.
Yeah.
And as you're working, I mean, do you find that, are you spending more time organizing media? I mean, as far as an assistant, where do you find you're doing most of the work?
With a lot of the repetitive tasks, I find ways to automate them, creating subclips and organizing things, especially when it comes to the VFX process, or creating paperwork based on documentation based on our timelines. I find that can be a very time-consuming thing, because a lot of departments, whether it's the sound, the DI, the VFX department, music department, or the studio who wants a music cue sheet, a lot of assistants will spend a lot of their time generating paperwork, and sometimes the paperwork doesn't even look all that great because you're just doing it functionally. You're putting something into a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet, and you're spending a lot of time typing in time code, when Avid gives you a really clean and easy way to get that out of the system. You just have to know how to manipulate it. And so whether it's using marker lists or EDLs, markers within EDLs, and then parsing EDLs, finding a clever way to automate the process of generating paperwork so that it is not only faster and less of a headache for me, but it's cleaner, more consistent, and it represents the room very well. So those are some of the things that I find myself doing, or at least it used to take me a lot of time, and I've now sped it up, which gives me more time to spend creatively, spend with John, talking about the scenes, notes on the scenes, alternate versions of the scenes. It's been a great use of my time, and it's also allowed not just me to get a better credit, but the people that I'm working with, the second assistants, the apprentice editors, the PAs, a great way to get them involved as well.
Yeah, I do believe in a very inclusive creative environment, as long as everyone knows the boundaries. The post PA should never go up to the director and say, I got a great idea for this scene. So there's certain boundaries that have to be observed. And but I really encourage everyone in my editing team, to have a creative voice, because I don't have all the answers, and some of the great breakthroughs that we've had, like in Chevalier, we did a few really cool things that Jared just experimented with, and I'm like, wow, that's really neat. But I also want to talk about the back and forth we have, because I kind of made a system in place. I'm very markers dependent, formerly locators, and I really keep track of a lot of notes. I keep track of the VFX and the ADR especially. And Jared designed a FileMaker Pro codebook kind of around my system. Yes. And you kind of customize this codebook to work with how I do things, and made it very efficient, where we can import all the markers into your code book, and boom, out comes an ADR list, or boom, out comes a music cue sheet.
Exactly.
So in that way, I learned, I adjusted, I made changes, because you said, well, if you do this instead, or tweak this, and but.
And you're also very mindful about not blowing away the markers.
Oh yeah.
So easy. I mean, it's tough in an environment, especially when you're working with a director or producer in the room. But, I think that's one of the things, right? It's like it comes from being a good assistant and understanding the bigger pictures, like how to work as part of a team.
Right.
Because not only is it mindful, and yes, it makes my day a little bit easier, but also it ensures that his notes and his thoughts are coming through exactly as he intended. So, sometimes I can't always be in the room and overhear everything, although I certainly try, so I can be as proactive as I can be. But, keeping the markers formatted and making sure that they don't get lost in, the scramble of everything.
Yeah, and a big part of that is my 10 years working as an assistant and just understanding the chain of command. There are editors out there that work with assistants that don't have a clear understanding of what they do. And so as much as the nitty-gritty technology goes over my head now, especially since it's no longer analog, which was my specialty, but I still want to know the process of things, and I still ask to be CC'd on emails, even if they're just technical emails to other departments, just so I have an awareness, because we are working as a team.
Absolutely. I mean, communication is key, whether it is through email, the markers, the whole system. I know a recent feature that we added in the marker window is being able to sort by date.
Creation date.
So now, because
But
markers
that's new. We don't have that yet.
But the creation date is already in there. So if you open an old version of your timeline in the newer version of Avid, you can sort by creation date.
With the markers?
Yeah.
Oh.
So
But-
any new markers you get, those will pop up on top.
But the column widths, they don't save sometimes.
Yeah, that's been my beef. I know.
We may cut that out of the webinar, or we keep that in. But yeah, well.
And I heard you can now maybe move markers, drag and.
Oh yeah, you could always do that. I think if you hold down Alt or Option, you should be able to click and.
What?
Yeah,
You can option drag a marker?
I think so.
What?
I think.
I'm going
We'll
back to
test
work.
that out.
Well, no, but
Yeah, you should be able to option drag a marker.
that's news to me. You just taught me something new. This is
Yeah.
fantastic.
How long has that been the case?
I don't know. I think
Like last
for a
7
long
years?
time.
Well, because the way that I've been doing it is that it's like if it's in filler, I add 2 add edits in the filler, move the filler over, and then drop the marker down. It's,
Oh, yeah,
But
yeah.
that's I feel like there's a bunch of ways to use Avid that give the user the power to do it the way that they want to do it. Like there are things, I would call them hacky, but it's really not. There's just additional functionality. It's there if you want it. It disappears if you don't need it, especially with the new UI. It's it's super straightforward. It's a lot cleaner than it might, seem at first. And especially what I've seen with editors that I've helped transition, including John, when you plug your old user settings into the new version of Avid and you touch your keyboard with your settings, everything snaps right into place.
Yeah, I admit I was apprehensive going to the new UI, and I just spent a day with Jared, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is so much better. And there's certain things I don't need to use part of the new UI, but if you customize it a certain way where it's comfortable and take advantage of the tabbing features, which I think are fantastic, I do feel people should take the plunge, because it literally only took me a day, and I was very comfortable with it.
Good plug.
And we've kind of quashed the myth, at least in my own opinion, of you can't upgrade mid-show. Because I feel like that's a very old school mentality, and there's nothing wrong with picking versions, staying with it, but Avid's always releasing updates so much more frequently now than in the days of Media Composer version 7, and then 3 years from then you would get version 8. But now we're getting all these updates all the time that constantly fix bugs, and we can take advantage of new features. So, you know, the one thing I don't upgrade is the operating system, but like the Nexus client and Avid Media Composer, and then I'll come into John's room and say, here's the new features, let's play around with them. Can we, you know, how do we make use of this? Being able to like gang 10 audio tracks. I don't know how to use it yet, but we were playing around with it, and we're like, we like all the colors. It's pretty cool.
I think you should probably, what I always liked when you would have like these seminars of neat features that you maybe didn't know about, or, you know, tips and tricks. I always have wanted, I know Stephen Cohn, I read he did a tips and tricks.
Avid
manual.
Agility.
Well,
that's what it became.
That's what it became.
It's my favorite
But
book.
I read when it was just bound, like, you know, self-made.
Like my self-made book?
Oh yeah, he's done a self-made book too, where he's bounded himself. But those seminars are very helpful, and you know, you can teach people how they can move markers, which I didn't even know.
It's funny. I did I think a session. I was in New York, and I was doing something with MPEG there. And just a little side story: a instructor at NYU said that she always told her students that if you think, "Wow, I wish there was an option to do that," a lot of times if you hold down the option key and try it, it might do what you think it should do.
Or it'll do something cool that you didn't even know, like, you know, option source record will bring you into, it'll toggle single composer window or dual composer window, and then option trim mode will bring you into restoring your last rollers, especially when you have a complicated asymmetrical trim setup, which is fantastic.
What is it? Option
trim mode.
Option trim mode.
Yeah, after you shift selected all your rollers. And,
well, I knew,
Yeah.
but I never remembered the key.
Yeah, it's just
combination.
muscle memory at this point.
I wish there was an option.
Yeah, option. Yeah. When in doubt, option.
But I mean, again, the software is so deep, and a lot of times when you need to get in and work, you're not going to be able to spend that time to figure out all those little things. But like I do in a lot of the webinars, it's if you learn 2 or 3 things that would help do what you do, then that's great. And of course, being able to do it when you're collaborating. I believe I heard in one session that you hadn't worked in 5.1.
Oh, well, let's not admit that. But yes, I mean,
we don't. I can cut that out.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But yeah, I mean, I went from LCR to 5.1, and it was amazing.
It changed the way you're working.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, it was on Antebellum because at Astra we were going direct out, and you know I had joined that during the director's cut, and it's not like you're ever going to change anything mid-show, especially once you get that set up. But that was all I knew. But again, on my time on Astra, a lot of it was research. A lot of it was like paying attention, seeing about how things were working, and then a lot of it was me thinking, how could things work? And I was taking in a lot of different resources, one of which was Evan Schiff's, at the time it was called Editing Brain Dump, and it was just so many useful tips and tricks, and one of them was specifically about working in 5.1 with Avid. And I had never done it before. I knew all about it in theory thanks to his videos, even the quirks about like using the panner at that point in time, and like just the best practices. And so when John mentioned that he had this project lined up and he was talking to me about it, I said, do you think we could do 5.1? I said it purely because I wanted to play with it.
Yeah.
And we were working on a movie, and I was like, oh, maybe they'll give us the resources. And I wasn't even thinking about the cost savings at the time, because that's, of course, what gets the people at the studio to...
Yeah, I mean, we actually, on Antebellum, we were, and even Chevalier, we did the preview right out of the Avid. So we didn't have to do a temp mix. I pride myself, because I love sound, and I want to make sure everything is polished, and the dialogue is, I mean, you know me with dialogue editing.
Well, and we use Isotope RX, so being able to have really clean dialogue tracks straight out of the Avid. Of course, you know, everyone on the mix stage is going to redo our work, and they're going to do it even better than we can. But just for temp purposes and to get our point across and for increased clarity, having access to those tools without having to export and re-import and manage extra media files, it's just apply the effect, do your work, render, and move on. Super, super straightforward.
Do you spend a lot of time, I assume, doing sound design work in Avid? Do you also do a lot of VFX work? Are you?
Tons. And all of the Boris effects are the ones that I go to. It's, you know, Continuum, Sapphire, And Mocha Pro within Media Composer is, I just think, ridiculously powerful to be able to stabilize shots, do phone screen comps or any screen comps. I was just using it the other day, not as a knock against Animat, because especially Animat even got better recently with not that recently, but it was you can change the color of the line itself. But I love taking stuff into Mocha because I like their UI. I like the way that you can interact with and rotoscope something and create a complex matte very quickly. We had north of 350 shots in Chevalier, and we temped all of them, almost all of them.
Yeah.
There were a few really long shots that we couldn't, but being able to pull that off with the team size that we had was, we were proud of that.
Yeah. I mean, usually the cutoff is around 350.
I think 250. When
Yeah, it
people
should
hear
be
that I'm doing
250.
300 shots, they're like, how? Part of it is the FileMaker database that manages a lot of.
That's right.
It does a lot of heavy lifting in terms of.
Well, that's why I know you can do it.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, when I say the cutoff, it's like when we need another VFX assistant. I mean, shows that I've done like Ad Astra and Spaceman, which I'm working on now for Netflix, there is a VFX department because there are thousands of shots. But a normal mid-budget movie may have, even Antebellum, we had a whole bunch that was, since it was a kind of a period piece, there were a lot of pan-outs and cleanups.
Do you use any other tools like Fluid Morph?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there was a shot in Chevalier that you pull. It's funny because sometimes we'll pass a fluid morph back and forth because sometimes you got to fiddle with it. You got to find the right frame.
Right.
Stream to stream, feature match, and it's just you got to play with it. It's hands on, and so he'll throw something to me, and I'll play with it. Like I got it close. Then he'll look at it and he'll fidget with it, and then there's a certain point where we go hands up just because we got it.
Yeah.
And he'll be like, look at this, and I'll never even know it was there.
Yeah, and what we're doing right now, John Grenham did a couple of fluid morphs because we got a note to speed something up, but it was a oneer. But we were able to fluid morph within the shot, and it works. So my first go-to is the Avid tools, but that includes Boris and Sapphire. And
I've always said that if you gave me 3D warp, animat, and the paint effect, good to go.
yeah,
I love that. Any other tools? I mean, you have Animat, you have Paint, you have. It's funny. I mean, I found scratch removal. Did you ever use that?
Yeah. There's still some digital dust busting that we have to do, like dead pixels every now and then, and using scratch removal is like just in a pinch. You know my favorite little feature? Fluid motion edit. I really like that. I don't even know how to do that in other pieces of software. Being able to change the motion vectors when you apply a time warp and you enable fluid motion, and sometimes you get some artifacting and it just looks a little funky. Being able to clean that up is that's the 1% that's magician.
So that is part of the time warp?
Yeah, so if you have a fluid motion effect that's, I don't even know if it has to be rendered or not, but it's applied to a clip. If you go into effects mode, it'll enter fluid motion edit and your whole screen will light up as a rainbow. And of course, all this is in the Avid manual, which is the only place that I knew how to read about it, because you can right-click anywhere in the interface and say, what's this? And it'll bring you exactly that page in the manual, and it's searchable. I mean, that's all the answers are right there.
Back in my day, I literally took the Avid manuals and photocopied every page. I'm probably going to get in trouble now since that was,
I won't turn you in.
But yeah, I mean, I just, back in the paper days, I just read every single page, and that's kind of where it starts. But as Jared said, yeah, now it's very easy to say, what's this?
There was a shot. There was a shot in a movie once that was it was a panning shot and it was rotating, and we had vari sped it, and so it was constantly changing, and there were these parallel lines in the background that the fluid morph would kind of garble up a little bit. And so the editor asked me, they were like, how do you take care of this? And I didn't know how to do it. I just said yes. And so I did some research and some Google, and someone said, oh, fluid motion edit can do this. And so that's where I taught myself how to do that. And you can paint it out one frame at a time and go frame by frame and nudge it back into alignment. And I mean, they were amazed. I was amazed.
I also understand you use the script-based editing and script.
Oh yeah,
big time. Script-based editing is like, I don't know.
I can't edit any other way now. It's ruined me.
I attribute that to how I was able to use a good amount of that footage when we do select media relatives. It's like, how did you do your research? It's all right there. I mean, it takes some time to set up because, truthfully, the script sync feature is great. I understand in documentary environments where you have a transcript of what was said, but in scripted environments, sometimes there's ad libs, so you really have to do it manually in order to ensure that you're getting, all of the footage accounted for and marked correctly in the script. But that's a great task for an apprentice editor to get someone into the room and in that environment, or a second assistant editor. And when they're going through the footage the first time, usually by the time we're done watching footage, in the bins and in frame view, which is another way, being able to just like organize it like a table, desktop is so. And there's a little hacky thing. I'm sorry, this is a little, but the notes in the bin. So this is kind of a hack that we have figured out where we can use, I have these template sequences that have title media on track 1 with a color effect applied to that. And then on track 2, there's a subcap effect. And so what I'll do is I'll duplicate that sequence, open it up, edit the subcap. So I'm not creating any new media. And I'll type a little note. And then I'll arrange that so it is aligned with a clip in the bin in frame view. You have to go into script view and order it so that it's at the top, because when a bin goes into frame view, it renders it from the top down. So anything at the bottom of the bin is going to be in the foreground. So that puts these sequences behind, and I can leave little notes for John from the script supervisor about visual effects, and it's a very graphical way to communicate.
Yeah, because I work in frame view mostly, and I know some editors that work in text view, but it's a great visual way to give me notes. And I first like to organize the footage in frame view, and the visual notes help. And we can send notes to each other back and forth. Like I even have a JPEG that just says Jared in bright neon colors. But the script is really, once I know the footage, like I go through the bin and frame view and stuff like that, especially when I'm working with the director, I just really rely on the script, because at that point I've committed the footage to short-term memory, and the script allows me to methodically audition readings and performances and lines. And I always tell my assistants, I said, look, I understand there'll be some mistakes here and there. Maybe you didn't click on the right line, but the most important thing is to make sure that everything in the script is reflective of what's in the bin. Because if you miss a take or miss a setup, I may not know it's there.
And that's the way I like to work too. Is I like to watch the footage in the bin. I mean, I've learned from John. We were talking about best practices. And do you watch the footage in order? Do you watch the circle take first, then work backwards? And so how do you watch footage? How do you digest this stuff? So usually I'll watch it in frame view and then leave notes, and then using the script, the Avid line script, you can go in, and I just it's cool because I'll leave markers. John gave me magenta to use. So I'll drop magenta markers, and when I'm going through the script, I can double click through all the takes, and if I find a take that has a magenta marker in it, I go, oh, my gut responded to this when I was, that was my first impression, I should use this. And so the first assembly sometimes I'll do if the script is ready from the script. But also, just because we're talking about it, for editors who don't want to work in frame view, you could work in list view. And what I've been doing with a FileMaker database, I don't know why you're laughing, it's really cool.
No, but it's
so cool.
It's your enthusiasm.
It's like
enduring. No, it's enduring.
Yeah. So what I've been doing is in the FileMaker database, the dailies that we'll get, I bring into the code book, and that gets merged with data from our script supervisor via a related table. So all the script supervisor's notes link up with the data from the Avid bin, and FileMaker can then generate a custom ALE. that has the shot descriptions and notes from the script supervisor in it, I can then use that to merge with the original master clips, and you can have a custom bin view that someone can organize in list view and just look at and see and read all the information that they want. Also, I can create different ALEs for that are modified in a different way using start and end time codes that bring it in a little bit, add handles to the subclips, and automatically generate subclips that don't have like .sub, .01, and they have handles so we can perf slip, because when we're on a show and we're setting up dailies, everything trickles downstream. So being able to perf slip on a quarter frame has been invaluable.
You just get them going.
This is awesome. So as far as so all of your go-to features, I guess we've already covered with Media Composer. Are there any other? If anybody said, why would you recommend Media Composer? If there was a student or somebody who said, I want to get into editing, why should I learn Media Composer?
It's about working as part of a team. I think there's no other piece of software that, even when I was in film school, they taught us Avid. Avid was a huge part of the curriculum, and we were told, just how prevalent it was in the industry. And even then, we weren't working in a shared environment. And that was the biggest thing that I learned on the job, was how to work with other editors. And we've got ways of working that I think are fairly common, although it's always interesting to learn how other people work. But we have a transfer bin. So, create subclip, that works as with sequences. So John will be working with the director in a reel, and I'll be able to open the bin that he's working on, take the latest version of the cut, not even have to take a full copy of the sequence or duplicate a project file or, clone an event and whatever the terminology is. I could take just the section I need. It's the latest and greatest. I can work on it on the side. I have a transfer bin, it says to John. It's at the top of the project. I can open it, put my work in there, close it, text John, say, hey, it's ready for you. And then without skipping a beat, John can open that, show it to the director, get feedback, or cut it right back in, and it slots in perfectly.
Yeah, I would say, shareability has always been Avid's advantage. Early on, I think it was their integrating the film environment where we're still in. But it's still relevant. There's still projects that are shot on film, or at least finished on film, and I think Avid is superior in that. But the shared storage and the robust way where we can collaborate as a team, I think Avid was way ahead of the curve on that, and probably did it better than anybody, and it keeps getting better. And so there's a reason Avid, in my opinion, is the mainstay of Hollywood, because unless you're doing a small project where it's just you, Avid is very robust. I know there could be a dozen people working on the same project, and I think that makes Avid very workable. It's also it seamlessly edits, Avid seamlessly integrates visual effects, natively, and a lot of things you can do in Avid, and the script sync, or the script-based editing, I should say, is par none. And I know Isotope does interface with other NLEs, but Isotope is
not in the same way as it does with Media Composer. I really like the way that Media Composer handles media. Go figure. It gives me the peace of mind that, that's why I'm able to troubleshoot things so quickly, is because I understand how the system works, how it's intended to function, and I know where the media files are being rendered to, where things are going when I'm importing them. I know how to copy and move and back up that data into an area that is not only secure, but then can be used as a backup or as a clone for other editors to work at remotely if we want to go work on the stage. So Media Composer gives me that peace of mind.
I know you can edit on other applications, and we have a lot of kids coming out of school who are learning, Premiere.
Yeah.
So we want to get them to learn Media Composer.
Yeah. Well, you guys started off right. I mean, you were very smart to engage USC because they still are an Avid-based school. So it's just getting young people to give Avid a shot. You know better than me, why Premiere is the go-to. I mean, I think first it was cost, but I don't think that's an issue anymore.
Well, this is just me postulating. I think that people like to work with tools that are familiar, and I think that Avid's been around for a while, and that's part of the reason that I trust it so much is because the word that keeps coming up, not just here but always, is robust, right? Avid is robust. It's been around. There's a quality to Adobe's software that's very approachable in a very tactile way, where you want to touch it, you can click and drag it, and you can move it around, and I think that comes with the way people have been raised, or at least lately on computers, especially with an iPad, right? Kids who can just touch it and move it around, and I think that's a very fast way to hit the ground running creatively, but there are ways that Media Composer operates specifically because of the history of how things have been done, and yeah, things can change, and I'm all for that. But I think once you understand how you're working as part of a bigger picture and not just on a solo project, that's where I think Media Composer starts to shine, and that's why I would encourage younger people to start exploring Media Composer, because I'm just trying to think about there are some things that are a bit esoteric about Avid, and they might seem unapproachable at first, but they're not, just because you don't have the context of how it might be used when you're differently when you're working as part of a team versus when you're working alone. And I would encourage students to try and get together, if you're in film school especially, get together and kind of form your own little editorial crew and work on a project together, as opposed to just having, I'm the editor on the project. Well, why don't you have an assistant editor and an editor, and you guys switch off? I mean, I'm not a teacher, but that's how I would maybe approach a class.
And I think there are a lot of people that maybe know Premiere and want to learn Avid, and they're like, okay, so how can I make Avid feel Premiere-like? So I'm familiar with it. And I just, if you do that, then you're limiting the power of the software that Avid is. And perhaps vice versa, it works that way too. Avid has got so many, is so deep, as you say, and has got so many things that you can do. You should not try to apply your knowledge of one NLE and work on another. You should take the effort to really dive deep and learn it like you're learning a different language. It shouldn't be that intimidating, but...
And you also want to make yourself more marketable as a student, where if you want to get the jobs doing feature film and TV, the majority are still using Media Composer. And to your point, even you mentioned earlier about taking the plunge and learning the new interface. Yeah. We actually put in one of the latest releases, when you create a user setting, do you want it to be Media Composer, or are you transitioning from Premiere, where it actually sets up the UI so it looks like the layout in Premiere, and you can change your keyboard to be Premiere as well.
But here's the thing, and I don't know, maybe I'm alone in this, but it's to John's point, I actually encourage people to embrace Avid Media Composer's keyboard because it's laid out that way for a reason. Yeah. And what I've seen a lot of people do is they come from another NLE, they try to remap their keyboard to make it like what is familiar to them, and then they're using the segment overwrite tool a whole heck of a lot, and it's not quite doesn't function the way that they do. And then the idea of filler comes in, which of course comes back from the old film days, and that was a new concept to me when I started using Media Composer. And interacting with filler and adding rollers, I mean, when I unlocked rollers, that was the day Avid made so much more sense to me. Asymmetrical trimming, slipping and sliding massive chunks, marking it in and out range, loading that into my clipboard, and then into the source monitor too. It's a whole different way of interacting with the timeline that most people aren't familiar with, especially if you're just transitioning over. So yeah, you're blocking yourself
I think there should be more outreach. I mean, obviously, Avid should really milk the idea that it's very integrated with our industry, and it has been for a long time. and those who may be working in commercials or indie films and stuff like that, where Premiere may be more prevalent, for them to work their way into bigger films that may be Avid based, they should learn that software, and I do think that Avid should apply more outreach opportunities for people to learn Avid. Not to say, well, this is how you can make Avid feel like Premiere, but why Avid does what it does and not try to emulate something else. So, because if they think, okay, well, I can make Avid work like Premiere, then maybe they think, well, why should I leave Premiere? So, I mean, Avid has so much more to offer.
Understanding why something is done is almost always more important than understanding how it's done. And you don't want to be one of the kinds of people, that's why I tell people who are shadowing, they come through, I'm like, you don't want to be one of the kinds of people who thinks that how it works is what it does, you know? Like people will say, press T and then press X. I'm like, oh, those could be two completely different things depending on, you know, what the keyboard layout is. But Media Composer is more accessible now than it ever has been. With now, you know, it's free to students, right?
Absolutely.
That's fantastic.
Going to lead right into that. So, you know, any student or schools can actually provide Media Composer for free to students. They just sign up for the Media Composer for Students program. So we want to get more of the next generation of editors to learn Media Composer, because it's just going to benefit them when they graduate to be able to get some of these jobs.
Yeah, I think Avid really should sell the fact that Hollywood is really based on Avid-based editing, and if people want a career in editing, they should know multiple NLEs, and here's a free way to learn it. But there should also be, I think, more marketing and education opportunities too, because, you know, personally I see a lot of that from Premiere, and like at least with ACE and the Editors Guild, and I just think there should be more get to know Avid, the new features of Avid.
Well, and I think whether this is Avid's responsibility or not, I think that anyone, it would be a good service to anyone to educate themselves on codecs, containers, the underlying technology of what it is that you're using, what does Media Composer sit on top of? Because that's helped me unlock a lot of the things that I do. Because there are other tools that I use as part of my, you know, I mean, we've talked about, you know, the video editing applications, but there are also utilities that I'm using behind the scenes, like this free utility called MDVX. I don't know the name of the guy who makes it. It's incredibly powerful. It's the only reason that I found out about it and I was able to use it at all was because I understood how Avid stored its media files and what, you know, an MXF OP1 atom file or OP atom file. So that's part of the education of it all.
I remember when Lightworks was a big competitor, and everyone loved the controller, and Avid did adopt their own Lightworks-like controller.
We had the MUI, right?
The MUI, yeah. And but I was a very early proponent of Avid, and I did assist on a Lightworks show, and it was like, oh my gosh, it's so un-user friendly. And I wrote articles in the Editors Guild magazine about why people should give Avid a go, because at the time they didn't like the keyboard, you know, it was very scary. And that's why I think if we just get people more of a nudge to adopt the new UI and to reach out to students and be like, this is why you should learn Avid, and here it is for free, and you know, don't be lazy, be multilingual, not just one thing, if they already know Premiere. But then to really teach what's unique about Avid, you know, and we covered a lot of that.
So I don't know how much more time we have, but I do want to ask each of you, what do you like about being an editor?
What I like about being an editor is all the exploration that I get to do with others, collaborating and finding these hidden gems within the footage, juxtaposing new images with each other and finding new meaning in them, presenting something that elicits an emotional response that, expected or unexpected, you know, it brings me a great deal of excitement.
I think what I like about being an editor is the the problem solving, the innovation, the creativity that comes out of taking disparate parts and harmonizing them together into something that is more than the sum of its parts. And what I really appreciate in the editing process is it's not just the picture editing, it's the dialogue editing, it's the sound design, it's the music, it's the color correction. So there's something very fulfilling seeing all these finishing processes elevate the material. And I often equate editing to like giving birth, to an entity, which is the film project or the TV project. It's something that even if the project isn't good, you still take pride in because you know of where it's been. It was once maybe in trouble, or this wasn't working, and you had an epiphany and a breakthrough, and it's almost like you're kind of creating life, which is this art form. So that is what I appreciate about being an editor.
I mean, it's such a great feeling. I know not that I've cut any feature film or television show, but when I do any editing, it's when the magic happens and you see the cut and the response, or you're just timed or something, the feeling that you get from that is just euphoric. It's like,
yeah. I mean, I still watch films that I've cut, that I've seen over hundreds of times, and I still get choked up at times, and then that is a moment where you think, yeah, this thing is like its own living entity, and it has the power to affect people.
It really is a time capsule too, because especially working on a film, watching all the frames go by brings back, every frame is like a whole door to memories that I have from the dailies process, from the camaraderie in the cutting room, and it sounds silly, but like what we ate that day. Like I remember when that scene came in, we got Thai food for lunch, and boy, it was the best. These weird little things that become, just treasured.
Yeah.
It sounds silly, but it's true.
No, you're right. It's a time capsule.
I think we get also told there's really no classes. There are, but you didn't learn how to be an assistant editor. That's something that you learned on the job.
Definitely, yeah. And I'm a huge proponent of on-the-job training and mentorship. I don't know. Of course, there are courses and things that are available of students' own volition, like, Master the Workflow is a really great course from Larry Jordan and Richard Sanchez. And they provide a lot of really phenomenal resources that anyone who's still in school or recently graduated would, or anyone who's trying to be an assistant editor has insight into this job that, truthfully, I didn't even know existed when I was studying film. So there are resources out there. Hopefully this is one of them that people will, I learned a lot from these kinds of things when I was in school.
Well, I want to jump in. I think a really good tool for breaking into the business as an assistant, especially if you're coming out of school and you feel you've got a fire to become an editor, and it doesn't mean you have to know things, but having some working foundation of editing is important. But this ACE internship program is a great tool, and anyone can apply. And we even have people from other countries apply. It is very beneficial if you're in the Los Angeles area because the internship takes place here. So a lot of people maybe on the East Coast that get it will move here, hopefully permanently relocate here, because this is a networking business, it's a word-of-mouth business, it's a freelance business, and it's a reputation business. And you can only build these things by actually engaging with people. So you could know Avid or Premiere or whatever platform better than anyone, but if you're not meeting the people to engage with, that could recommend you, that you can network with, that you can learn from, it's going to be hard to break in, but it's definitely not impossible. And the ACE internship program so integrates all applicants into a big family, and you meet people. There are a lot of social gatherings and networking opportunities. And so even if you apply and you don't get the internship, it's still a very rewarding process, and you go through a lecture series, which is a multi-day event, and there are books that are recommended. Laurie Jane Coleman and Diane Freeberg's make the cut. And it's a very good way to get your foot in the door, and then you just need to be prepared, have a little bit of luck, and you get opportunity.
And have a good attitude.
Yeah.
Because as you have that good attitude and you're working together, it's just going to help go to the next job and collaborate with the next one. And
it's all reputation. So if you come in and you're disagreeable, or you can't learn to anticipate, you can't learn to work with a team, or you come in and you're very self-entitled, because I've encountered a lot of young people like that, and it's only going to get you so far. So, you know, I do believe that the good people rise to the top. You know, it's with the right attitude, work ethic, and enthusiasm that matters, and you saw it in spades from this guy. So,
absolutely. And that 1% magic.
yeah, yes, magician, yeah.
So, well, great. Well, thank you very much. This has been really great, a lot of great information. We definitely want to thank John and Jared for their time joining us. Thank you so much. Look forward to all the future work that you will be working on and crafting. So, thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
very much,
having us.
Michael. Thanks.